Welcome everyone to BeyondPhrenology, to this new episode. Today we have with us Dr. Louis Favela from Indiana University Bloomington and his colleague, Professor Michael Silberstein from Elizabethtown College. Uh, so welcome Louis and Professor Silberstein to BeyondPhrenology. You both are neurophilosophers, and this podcast is very much about philosophy of neuroscience, cognitive sciences. We cover both philosophical as well as empirical, findings and discussions. And it's great that we have some of you, to kind of direct us where the neuroscience is going and, look at it from a more meta scale. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Having me.
Appreciate it. So, Madhur and I have talked in the past about, kind of some of the conceptual commitments that the neurosciences or cognitive sciences, philosophy of mind, they have. And I think it's fair to say that Madhur and I agree that some of these commitments are problematic, maybe to put it lightly, if not maybe straight out false or misdirecting. And so one of my favorite targets to go after as one of these things that it's maybe not helpful or maybe even false is the notion of representation and what representation might mean in these various sciences and in philosophy. So I'll just kind of give like a quick little intro to a project that I did a couple of years ago on the concept of representation. And then I'd be curious to hear what Michael thought of that work. I don't know if we've talked about that work before, but a couple of years ago, Edouard Machery, who's at the University of Pittsburgh, and I were chatting, and we were both expressing a bit of frustration about philosophers, they'll regularly say things like, well, everybody knows what representation means in the cognitive sciences. Or we kind of have that worked out to some degree, what is meant when we're studying a neural representation. And Edward and I looked at each other and we were like, do we know? Is there any agreement on what the concept of representation means? And we started looking around in various literatures, and we found that there wasn't very much, what we might say, empirical work on the use of the term representation in various relevant literatures. So what we found was people would maybe pick out their favorite examples and say, oh, well, in this famous paper, they kind of used the term representation in this way. And in this paper, they kind of used it in this way. But there's no systematic evidence about how the concept was used. So our project, like I said, a couple of years ago, came on 2023 in Frontiers in Psychology, was an attempt at trying to at least start gesturing at some concrete evidence of how the term representation and related terms are used in these sciences. Go and check out that paper. I encourage you. This year, we did a symposium on it in the journal Mind and Language, where Edward and I responded to a couple of philosophers, Francis Egan and Rosa Cow, and the neuroscientist Jack Krakauer. So they gave us some wonderful feedback and things to think about, and we gave them a response. But what did we find in our empirical study? So the study was essentially a survey with these various vignettes that were attempts at reconstructing what a typical journal figure might look like in a neuroscience venue. So, we had a picture of a block design fMRI presentation to a participant with things like a house and a face. And then next to it, we had like a picture of a brain scan with a little part lit up. And then we had some, little pokey thing that said we were recording from these neurons. And so we said this vignette and we said, okay, so while the participant is looking in the fMRI machine, they're presented with houses and faces. When the face is present, this part of the brain lights up. How would you describe that activity? We gave them a few different options. So we gave them options such as the stimulus caused the neural activity, the stimulus conveyed information to the neuron about the activity, the neuron was about the activity, the neuron represented the activity. So we tried to give some different kinds of concepts that covered what we took to be some of the core uses of the term representation in the sciences. So there are causal descriptions, right? One thing happens and then another thing happens. There's information theoretic, right? Somehow through the process, there's a carrying of information. And then we included some more kind of heavier philosophy of mind terms, we could say. So intentional terms, so aboutness, we might say, the single neuron when it lights up for Jennifer Aniston or Bill Clinton's face, we might say that the neuron is about or has an intentional relationship with that face or something like that. And so, what did we find? Again, I encourage you to look at the paper, but in short, what we found was a lot of confusion and uncertainty in how these terms are used. We found no consistency in how they were applied across the group of neuroscientists, the group of psychologists, and the group of philosophers. So we didn't have enough participants. We had about 800 or so, but that wasn't powered enough to kind of look at subdisciplines. So we just took them as these big groups. And what we found was there was at least a leaning towards causal terms. So more people seemed comfortable saying the neural activity was caused by the stimulus. Uh, Less people, by far, were interested in describing it in intentional terms. So they were really hesitant to say the neuron is about the face. And that included the term representation. So the term representation was not used very much, and it was not used with confidence. So we asked participants to give us a confidence rating as well to go along with that. So that's what I mean by sort of uncertainty on the part of the participants to select some of these terms. They might choose something in the middle between a 1 and a 7. They might pick like a 4 or a 5, saying, "I'm not quite sure that I'm using this term or that I want to use this term." So we took that as a sign of ambivalence or uncertainty. Um, this kind of lines up with, I think, what we expected, right? We expected that there wasn't a deep theoretical commitment to what a representation is, especially a neural representation. There was more commitment to thinking about them in causal terms. And so that was kind of like this project that we did, and then we received some commentary. I'm actually curious, Madhur and Michael, what you think about results like that and what your experience has been. Reading various kinds of neuroscience papers and how they're using these various terms. I'm just kind of curious.
So, Michael, take the
Um,
mic. Yeah.
so I have to disagree with everything Louis said. No, I'm kidding.
Hmm.
Um, Louis knows I'm very much in agreement. So I think everything he said is also true about computation. So what I would say about both these things, of course, obviously they go hand in hand, but what I would say about both these things is they're either probably obviously false when they're put in any really strong kind of way, like a Turing machine or whatever, or trivially true. So I'm sure there is some perfectly reasonable sense in which the brain is quote unquote processing information, which is distinct from, say, computationalism. And I think there's some very perfectly reasonable intentional sense in which we have representations, we represent things or whatever without a capital R or the sort of scary things that is often intended to mean. And when you talk to, I mean, Louis and I have both been in these situations together, and um, neuroscientists will often say, when you ask them these stuff or you present the stuff, they'll say, well, they'll fall back on abstractionism or instrumentalism or whatever word you want to use for this. But then they'll immediately turn around and say, start talking about the brain running algorithms. So I don't, it's not shocking or surprising, but I think that it's a term of art. They have computational tools. They use phrases like neural circuit, even though they mean different things by it sometimes. So I don't think they think it through. Like when you really push them on it, are you really a realist about this? And if so, in what sense? And if not, then what do you think about this language? And I think you see the same thing that always happens in these situations. I'm old, I've been in philosophy of mind and cog sci for a long time, and people just start then reinventing the term. They add epicycles. So there's
Hmm.
now tons of, as we all know, definitions of computation and representation designed to keep the idea alive. And I think at that point it just gets so watered down that again, I think it's trivial or troublesome.
So, you know, um, I sometimes feel lucky that I'm not in neuroscience, per se directly right now. I'm in a biomechanics department. It would have been really hard for me to survive among the neuroscientists, had I continued the neuroscience trajectory. Specifically because I agree with both of you, and I am extremely vocal about this disagreement with computational and representational, ideas. To be clear, I don't deny that brains cannot have representations. At certain scale, they can have representations. Representations in a very, you know, um, literal sense. So, for instance, when it stands for something else. So, for instance, I stand for, Mangalam. In that sense, yeah, I mean, we have representations about our memories, about people, about culture, about a number of things, entities. However, the claim that brain acts or brain functions in terms of representations by operating on representations, at this point, it's kind of absurdity, and there's enough empirical evidence, against that, idea, and it's kind of perplexing to see that being, the majority agreement. If you go back, for instance, in 2006, there was an article in Current Biology by Barbara Webb on transformation, encoding, and representation, where she talks about, these issues, not a perfect resolution, but just to demonstrate that it's been 2 decades that people have been actively thinking about, what does these words mean, transformation, encoding, representation. So, for instance, is the, for instance, if I have something on my screen, uh, does my, the hard drive in my computer, does it have a representation in the same way the brain has, for instance, right? Or is the hard drive encoding what I have in the screen, or what I have stored, uh, those kind of questions. And I agree with Michael that it has been a moving goalpost to keep the enterprise alive. Once you ask them, so people, you see, download any random article in neuroscience and you will see all sorts of computation ideas. The brain is computing, or this part of the brain is computing, that kind of, information. And then you push the authors, like, what do you mean by computation? So they'll start with something and you push, like, really, do you really think that this is how it is being computed? What do you think is being operationalized? What do you think is being acted upon as an entity, in computation? And then they keep changing the goalpost as a field. A lot of it tied to sociology of science and things like that. But definitely, and I think representation is also the idea which has kind of held neuroscience hostage in certain ways. And it's very clear that people are leaving neuroscience in troves. A lot of people, after spending decades, because yes, we know so much more about physiology. The machines are getting better, but in terms of having an even a basic idea of how the brain functions, this tissue basically, how does light photons get into your muscles, through your eyes in the brain? I don't think we have even a slightest idea, despite, all of the hard work we have done in the last few decades.
Yeah, I'm glad that this just kind of confirms. I think we're all kind of on the same page with a lot of these. I'm glad Michael brought up computation. That's another term I think is problematic. And I think Maduro just started gesturing at some of those points that are really problematic with it. When Michael said there are epicycles, the terms coming back, I think right now we're seeing an especially heavy turn back towards representation with the increased popularity of Gen AI. So
Hmm.
I think that a lot of the work in Gen AI that has so it's hard to summarize it. There's a history there, right? And
Hmm.
so, neural networks, which are essentially what Gen AI are were attempts, early attempts, at least, in the if not going back to Macaulay and Pitts
Um,
in the
uh,
40s.
can we call them something else than neural networks?
Yeah, how about artificial networks?
Yeah, I think we need to get rid of the neural network term
Yeah,
to
I agree. It's an excellent point. And see, even I'm seduced into
yeah.
using these terms because
We
it's
should have
It's
so
some
just
parity between biological systems and what we do outside
I
artificially.
to your point, I think that. across the board. I mean, we see the conversation about pseudoscience and, theories of consciousness,
Hmm.
but cognition, I think across the board, we've learned a lot of amazing stuff, as you pointed out, but none of it lives up to the hype. And I think the explanation for why things are the way they are is what you alluded to. It's to do with the non-cognitive aspects of science, sociological, economic, and so on. So I think, like you look at all the hype about generative AI. I mean, I hope most of us would say, clever trick, not what brains do, and certainly no real intentionality, no sentience, not even logical inference, right?
To be
Yeah,
honest, I'm yeah, sorry.
but but, but I think one of the dangerous things is using words to describe what these machines are doing, words that are very mental, like mentally loaded words, right? So the term representation,
Like hallucination.
like hallucinations, exactly. I was going to build to that, right? So the term representation, so I'm thinking of this work by like Yammans and DeCarlos, excellent 2016 paper called "Using Goal-Driven Deep Learning Models to Understand the Sensory Cortex," and they were making a deep analogy
Mhm.
between these net artificial networks as being structured in ways quite similar to the way that the visual cortex is set up as well. And so there's an analogous relationship between these artificial networks and what brains are doing in vision. So they want to say, right? But if they start building in the term it represents, right, it's already loading us to start thinking that the machine is representing, that it's having a kind of mental state. And I find that problematic. And exactly the
Mhm.
example that Michael gave, right? We use like terms like hallucination or Gen AI has been creative. These are terms that we ascribe to minded things.
Mhm.
Minded things are creative. Minded things hallucinate. But then we kind of slip into using these terms, and I worry that then not even the general public, but even experts
Yeah.
start getting seduced. As Madhur just called me out a few minutes ago, even I'm still using like these biological terms to describe non-biological things. So I think it's so slippery and it's very worrisome to me going from
Uh,
the mental words to the non-mental phenomena.
just because we have superior olive in the brain doesn't mean that brain is a martini, right?
That's
Okay.
right.
So, so, so the question is, and I see this, these papers all over the place, especially now with Gen AI, and I'm very bullish on AI, by the way, as a augment, as a technology. But definitely it has a potential to bring neuroscience, back a few years in terms of, we were almost on the verge of realizing that, brain is not what we have been, portraying it as. And now suddenly we have Gen AI, and, I think it is actually making a lot of us getting back into the same pit, and perhaps deeper this time, and that's a risk. But at the same time, I don't think I want to police, or we can have policing, given how science works. But my question, to Michael, given that you mentioned pseudoscience, and I'm working, by the way, with a philosophy student from Oxford University on a piece related to that. We know that certain things are pseudoscience. For instance, we have this terminology like crackpottery, for instance, right? We know there's something which is a completely crackpot. We know something is a belief, like for instance, the Earth is a flat Earth. What do you call it? Is it pseudoscience, or is it just a false belief? Uh,
Well, of course, you're getting to the demarcation problem.
yeah.
And I'm going to save us all from going down that hole very deeply. But um, just to keep it simple, whether or not you call things like, free energy principle or IIT, et cetera, pseudoscience is going to depend on, where you draw the line demarcation wise. I don't feel compelled to call it pseudoscience. I just don't think it's good science. I mean, it's early days, you got to start somewhere. I don't think I don't think these are crazy ideas. I just think that the hype far exceeds the delivery. For example, with IIT, they make these predictions,
Hmm.
based on phi, and we know that there are these things, which based on the definition of phi and the nature of these things must have some degree of consciousness. Most of us just think it's absurd, but instead of, moving on or whatever, they bite the bullet and redefine phi and so on. The free energy principle, I mean,
Oh, don't
yes,
get me started.
yeah, okay. It's
And
you
that
see
is
what
pseudoscience. I disagree with you. That is
yeah.
complete pseudoscience.
Okay, what's fine? You can pseudoscience or bad science. I'm okay either way, but I mean, it doesn't make interesting predictions, right? It doesn't, have any, reasonable disconfirmation, confirmation.
Hmm.
It doesn't meet. I don't think the only my point is it's not astrology, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
it's a reasonable, it's
It's
a reasonable start, maybe, you
so
know.
it so
But
if you are able to publish astrology in Nature Neuroscience, does it become science? That's my question.
depends on how much grant money you have, probably.
Okay.
But yeah. So I'm interested in like Maduro, I don't know if you would go this far. I know Louis is sympathetic, but I would even say that a lot of the stuff, aside from these issues we're raising, is it's brainerism. It's, like
Hmm.
from my 4E, 6E, however many E's we're at the moment perspective, I would say it's, embodied, embedded, et cetera, cognitive agents that have representations and engage in cognition and have conscious states. So I think even just and but if we're going to focus on the brain, I think one mistake that a lot of these views make is they treat it as a neuron machine. And
Hmm.
that's where you can easily get lost in computationalism and some of these other things. But I think there's growing evidence. People like think about the entangled brain from Luis Pessoa and others, and I've written about stuff like this. I think there's just increasing evidence that the brain is this multi-scale thing. You
Hmm.
have glia, you have neurons, you have RNA networks, you have electrical fields, you have neural synchrony. You know, I just think the neuron machine analogy is a at some point an unhelpful abstraction.
Yeah, but Michael, all those multi-scales are just contributing to the computations, right? And
Hmm.
Oh,
and they're
that's
representing.
that's
How
what I
else
mean.
can you explain? How else can you explain what the
I don't know
brain
what
is
I
doing?
maybe it's I don't know, Louis, what you'd say about this, but maybe it's a dynamical
You know,
system.
I asked these very simple questions. So, for instance, if somebody claims that brain is a computer or it computes, so my question is like, for instance, okay, let's say I buy its computes. As soon as we want to draw any analogy with a computer, the silicon computer, you need to have a time clock, for instance. You need to have like a time machine because every neuron has a different length, the axonal width is different, the delays are different, and they're not just different across neurons, they are different across your whether you have had coffee or not before. Okay, so the delays completely change. Now the question is that how is it that the information is like you need to have concepts of a receiver, of an encoder, if you're actually trying to do the real analogy with artificial systems. The question is, how can we have computation without any of the subsidiary, routine framework which is needed for computation in an artificial world? Where are the other stuff? Where are the peripheral components? We have protocols, for instance. When we are talking about computers, we have protocols to transfer information over the internet, and computers themselves have protocols to transfer information as packages. Like there's no evidence of anything like that. So, is it computing in a sense of it's doing something? In that case, when an amoeba is doing something, or for instance, when a watermelon in my kitchen is rotting, I think that is also doing something, right? I mean, the stuff is changing inside. Can we also call it doing some computation?
Michael, you wanna?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think to the abstractionism point, um, you can model a lot of things computationally, right?
Hmm.
Including thermodynamic processes. You can model a lot of things with, differential equations, um, uh, and so on. These are great tools. We gain insight. Maybe they give us predictive and capacities for intervention. But I think the problem is that we just get mugged by these tools. on these theories, and we, take them as literally true. I mean, it's a weird thing about science. You can understand why we're constantly taking human artifacts and then saying, hey, this thing in nature is a lot like this human artifact, and then away we go with the analogies and the metaphors and so on. I think that's perfectly reasonable and fine, but I think it's just too easy to fall into that as, the way things really are.
Yeah, that's the kind of trivially true notion of computation that I think you mentioned earlier, right? If it's so broad that it just means regularly doing something with some sort of output, if it's decomposing watermelon flesh and attracting flies or something like that regularly happens, it has a regular kind of output. Is that computation? Well, I guess. What if I say yes? What do we get from that? Then it just becomes so watered down, right? That it's just what's the point of
No
even
pun
using the
intended.
term? No pun intended. Yeah, exactly.
But there is,
Uh,
I would say there's one exception. If we're in the matrix, then maybe it is computation.
I don't even know if the matrix is computation, not in the way that we do computation. I mean, who knows, right? Give me some
Yeah.
definitions. But I think that that happened.
Scientifically, right? Like what, yeah. What isn't? Yeah.
Yeah, and I see that with the term representation as well. Daniel Dennett has talked about, representation can be really cheap, right? It can be that a key is a representation of the lock, right? That's a representation. When you are at the beach and you step barefooted in the sand and you walk away, there's a representation of your foot. When two things are wiggling together, is are they representing each other? I don't know. I mean, sure. Like,
Yeah.
do I want to die for that term? No.
Uh,
But what is it buying us?
I mean, a flag has a representation of the wind. I mean, every dam interacting, a physical manifestation is a representation in that trivial aspect.
I think I can, you know, to try to explain it, um, I think most philosophers and scientists, maybe a decreasing number these days, have it in their head that to explain is to reduce. And that
Hmm.
reduction might be, to a smaller spatiotemporal scale. It might be causal or causal mechanical in nature or constructive, as Einstein would put it. Or maybe it's in terms of some more fundamental principle, right? Like IIT or FEP, but it's always some like kind of reduction. And so um, these neuroscientists, right, they're playing that game, right? It's got to be about mechanisms or computation or representations. Otherwise, it's got to be about something like that per the rules of their game. Otherwise, they're not doing their job. And even if that's not maybe gaining us the most amazing insight, it does serve them in all kinds of socioeconomic ways, if nothing else.
In a Kuhnian sense, so Thomas Kuhn, historian and philosopher of science, wrote this book, supremely popular, The Structure of Scientific
Hmm.
Revolutions. And in it, he describes the process of science. And you have these early days where different paradigms are kind of fighting it out.
Hmm.
Eventually, one kind of comes out on top, and then you have, these kind of states of normal science. And normal science is when, you have universities that have a kind of curriculum that they teach. These people go on to labs. They learn certain techniques to record and data analyze. They have certain journals they publish in. Everyone uses words that supposedly they all understand so that, the neuroscientist might not use, windmill, but he might think of circuits or something like that. But everyone kind of agrees on that. And then for Kuhn, why does science ever change? Well, it's because there's a bunch of anomalies that pop up. And so the
Yeah.
science can't explain things
Hmm.
that's bubbling up in their data. And so I just wonder, if we think of, the neurosciences and the cognitive sciences as practicing a kind of normal science, um, what is the anomaly? Like, what are the anomalies going to be? It seems like you can always
Yeah.
adjust the definition of computation
S-
and representation to work. So in
s-
this kind of Kuhnian framework, you will never
mhm.
falsify, right? You will always
Yeah.
kind of adapt. I don't know if you guys think that's fair
So,
or,
so I would like to answer Louis this that I have been thinking a lot because I mean I read Kuhn again and again and also Lakatos and and the whole idea of falsification and what makes actually science science. Uh, I don't think Kuhnian revolution is happening again in neuroscience. I think Kuhn was in a different era where revolutions could happen in sciences, where normal science could transform into, a paradigm could actually shift. But at that time, we were not using millions of dollars of worth of instruments, and we did not have a very centralized grant funding structure. So, 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 so science, we have much more science now. We have a capacity to do a lot of things, but we also have more centralization. So it is not just about, anomalies, because of course, when you have moving goalposts, you can deal with anomalies. But as well as we have socioeconomic structures and socioeconomic incentives, which are too big to dethrone, by an anomaly, because anomaly has to be powerful enough. But ultimately, it has to move the minds of scientists, because ultimately, at the end of the day, science is a social enterprise. So an anomaly is like is a poor little anomaly now. You know?
Yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, this might be beyond Kuhn and Lakatos. This might be like Feyerabend, whatever. It's uh, by the way, I don't think any of us are ever going to get invited to anything in neuroscience again. But speaking of socioeconomic incentives, but in all seriousness, I do think in the grand scheme of things, none of these people, none of these paradigms have any incentive to change or say, you know what, I'm moving on. And you've got to have that, right? Whether it's economic or it's social or
Hmm.
some kind of norms. If you're just, I mean, we of course we know this from the history of physics and biology and lots of other sciences. If you're just infinitely allowed to add epicycles and you still get rewarded for it, well, that's what people are going to be inclined to do.
Yeah. I think Madur's point about it's kind of the infrastructure for science, I think is an important one. Some philosophers of science have been writing about the issue of science and values, right? And what values inform our science. And one of the values comes from the values that we have to ascribe to based on the funding that we've received.
Hmm.
So there are some places that offer funding where part of your application says, how does this project fit with the vision of, and such person who gave their money, right? So
Hmm.
there's always going to be these imbued values. But one thing that one philosopher of science, contemporary Heather Douglas, has argued that we need to have that it's not just that this funding is the issue, but it's the nature of the funding that's the
Hmm.
issue and the kinds of funding. I think this is consistent with what Madur said, but it's too central, right? So Heather Douglas has argued for, I think, maybe like six different kinds of funding structures that we ought to have and be explicit. So, for example, you would still have an NSF type of funding, right? Where you apply, you've got experts purportedly who review it and all this kinds of stuff. And then this is money from the government, US government, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes people get money from industry. What she thinks is that we need to be explicit whenever we publish work, that we say what kind of funding we got it from in order to frame it. And there might be different, virtues and vices for getting funding from, say, the NSF as opposed to from Google, for example, or vice versa. But she also talks about that we should have funding that's almost like a lottery system. Just have people put
I
their hat
completely
in
agree.
the circle
Hmm.
and just see kind of what happens and let these be risky projects.
Hmm.
And I just wonder, both to you, Mador and Michael, do you think, what Heather Douglas is saying, that maybe being explicit about where your funding comes from, and then also having some of these other mechanisms that are maybe more lottery based and things, do you
Hmm.
think that would help address some of these,
I just
issues?
published a paper in Frontiers in AI saying that we need to reduce human reviews in funding, and we need to bring more AI. And by the way, I'm not equating AI with the brain, but the thing is, AI has a much wider scope of umbrella of thinking, or not, again, not thinking, but it has information about a lot more things. At least it is not biased the way humans are biased. Or if it is biased, it's a much bigger bias umbrella than a few individuals. And it is also not centralized. And then we can have humans, that was just a proposition in one of those, papers. But I completely agree with you. The we are not letting chance play a role right now in research. It is so structured that we have completely we are playing gods basically, that we are gods and there's no serendipity of discovery,
Yeah,
right?
I agree with all that. We need a more parliamentary system instead of two or three party system. There needs to be room and support for other ideas to flourish and so on. And it's not just socioeconomic, but it's social media, it's fame, it's a lot of science and science popularization starts to look a lot like the influencer stuff in any other area of our life.
Hmm.
And I think that's especially toxic for science because it's not what it's supposed to be doing. But everything, I think it's even worse, right? I don't even know how to approach it, but everything Louis said was true before the current, dare I speak his name, political era. But now science funding and all that's even weirder, right? Everything Heather said was true before that. Now what, right? Look what's happening to money in science and who gets it and why. And so,
Uh, I mean, politics aside, uh, I think for a long, institutes are generally good, but uh, I think one of the probably the change with not having study sections, I think that's a good move in that direction. I don't know the overarching changes that will come, but not having study sections, I think it's a good idea because study sections get strong hold over certain amount of funding, right? And unless you are in good books or study section, there is an incentive to be very personal in study sections. So I think move a step away from study sections. I think it's a really great move. And I welcome that, uh, you know, with uh, with all my love. Uh, what I find very perverse right now going on is so if you follow LinkedIn or any social media, people celebrate funding and people basically pat on each other's back based on the funding they receive. And the way I look at funding has always been a means to an end. The end is actually science and discovery about the nature of the universe or the nature of the human being. But I don't know when that happened and how that happened. That there's a gradual shift from funding as a means to funding as an end. And now we have a cycle where we most of the empirical scientists are actually just working for the funding, and whatever science comes out of it, I know several labs myself, and I feel the pressure is just a byproduct of achieving those funding because all your personal incentives are all tied by funding right now rather than actually deeper science. Because when is the last time somebody you are introduced when you go to a talk, depending on like this is the eureka moment this person has uh, made us feel. It mostly starts with like the person has got like 20 million funding in their, whatever tenure. So I don't know how that perversion happened. I think we and that talks about that's about value. I think we as scientists have to devalue. I mean, we need funding to work, of course, that's a requirement. But in our own minds, the way we congratulate ourselves, I think we have to put a because institutionals don't do that. It has to be on individuals that we have to pat on our back based on eurekas and insights rather than actually funding.
Yeah, I agree with much of that. It one thing that strikes me as odd, and that's the nicer way to put it, is a lot of people who receive funding, what do they produce with that funding? And that's an that's an odd little dynamic there. So, what we end up seeing is a lot of the same labs just keep getting like they're just funding their grant making machines and they just pump out lots of
Uh,
publications, get lots of citations. But what's the impact? What's the quality of
uh,
the work, if anything, that's related to what they originally um, got funding for? Um, you know, Earlier part of my career, I was advised, don't go for Department of Defense funding because they will hold you to what you say you're going to do, and they will make sure that you're actually doing the studies you said you would do.
yeah.
And people said, so go for the NSF funding or NIH funding. It's much more open ended. And I started thinking to myself,
Uh,
maybe, you know what? maybe we need a
So
little bit more constraint, a little bit more constraint. We got to strike a balance there, right? Like there is something about being open-ended, and it should
yeah,
be adaptable to that. But there's also, living up to what you say you're going to do. And
yeah,
furthermore, is what you're going to do going to be interesting, novel,
yes,
give rise to those
yeah.
eureka moments, like Madhur was saying, are very rare.
So I'll give you my first-hand account of this. I was told the same thing, especially with DoD, which is now DOW funding, that they will hold you accountable and you have to give annual reports that this is exactly what you have done. Which I think is a good idea. It does not apply so much for other national agencies, and I personally know labs who have got millions, not a few millions, like quite a large number of millions, and who have not even done anything because the pilot data was sufficient and nobody would ask them. So they published pilot data a few years later, after the grant, and then that would itself count as findings. So I'm pretty sure a lot of grants never get done anything. The other thing we don't have is I think we need two major things in the way grant function. One, we need a parameter for penalization, not legally, but at the same time, we should not incentivize bad science by giving more money, or we should have people accountable whether if you're not delivered, you should be, basically not get those grants, or at least there should be a gap, definitely not continuous funding. And second thing, we need to incentivize people who are good with money. So, for instance, if I know that if I can't spend the money goes back, I will just burn the money, right? And that's what happens. I think we need to incentivize people. For instance, I am very deft with money. A lot of people are. They can produce a lot more with very little money. So if you apply for a grant for like let's say a few million or a few $100,000, and you are able to complete a job in less, those people should be incentivized, by converting extra grant or giving them an extra grant because they are producing so much with little money rather than actually being penalized. So the system itself is not set up to penalize bad science and incentivize good science, both from the economic standpoint as well as from the standpoint of insights. And I also think the grant proposal should have, and this happens, by the way, despite of all the hundreds of documents we prepare for the grants. So, I just submitted one today, by the way. The final proposal was 151 pages. Okay. So a lot of it is automated, but still 60, I wrote more than 60 pages myself. So, I think we also need to have a larger section of what would be delivered at the end of the day. Very, very measurable, delivery in terms of insights as well as in terms of product, whether it's a patent, whether it's a publication. I think, and that has to be mapped, one-to-one mapping with certain room for failure and certain room for, extra success by the end of the proposal. And then third, and uninvited, I think that it would be better to endow people. So for instance, I think if I have a sure shot chance that I will get a couple of $100,000 for the next 15 years, I can produce much better science than if I just have that all the money to burn in next 3 or 5 years, right? So I think uh, by endowing people with the grants that okay, these are $3 million in your name, and you will be getting return. Whoever will manage the money, maybe your university or an IH or whatever hedge fund. And if you have 6% return or 5% return for a $3 million grant, which itself is $150,000 per year, that's enough for a few PhDs and some utilities or consumables. And I think that would be a much better idea to promote science than just give off the money in a very small duration and just let it go, run wild.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And maybe if there were more constraints like that in place, it would reduce the hype. People wouldn't be incentivized to say, I'm now cognitive neuroscience going to solve the hard problem, or, I'm going to explain every aspect of psychedelic experience. And I mean, there is obviously, I want to be clear, there's some really cool, great, interesting neuroscience out there, and in terms of biological mechanisms and
Hmm.
dynamical stuff and so on. But none of it rises to the hype. And, I think the smart thing is just not to promise that much in the first place or be required to promise that much. Because, uh, you know, is there really going to be, per your thing about, Kuhnian
Hmm.
paradigm change? Is there really going to be something like, quantum mechanics or relativity, compared to classical mechanics? Is there really going to be a theory of everything, of even just the brain, let alone all of 4E cognition? I'm just dubious that, this is that kind of situation. I think we're going to need a lot of different
Hmm.
theories at different scales, focusing on different aspects, and we think about how to integrate all that. That'd be a long story, but um, I don't think the physics model might not even be the right model in physics, but certainly seems like the wrong one in cog sci to me.
I agree with you. So, so,
Yeah,
so, so Louis and Michael both. Sorry, Louis, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
So, I mean, I think we have too much of agreement here. Okay, and it might seem a little biased. So let's say that we have, first of all, it's been very hard for me to get people on the podcast to debate about, for instance, like hardcore chauvinist internal model people have been very reluctant to come on the podcast, to discuss a model. Some people who have actually published papers defending the computational framework, pretty heavily have rejected to come to argue about it or to discuss. Where do you think the debate starts? So let's say that we have, and I think I'll try to organize something like that. Uh, if we believe that there's something called truth or, or falsifiable, and you have two competing theories, there has to be an experiment, or if it is scientific, one should be able to design at least theoretically an experiment which can falsify one of those, right? Falsify both, but eventually lead to the falsification of one of those, right? That's the whole idea of competing theories, right? So do you think that is happening in neuroscience, and how do we start to do that, given the dominance of representationalism and computationalism?
Yeah, maybe I can give a first shot. So, the idea, I think Maduro was talking about what's called crucial experiments, right? What's the
Hmm.
crucial experiment that will, decide, among theories or whether this
Yeah.
one's going to be falsified or not? Um, that's really hard to do. But I think there can be, groups, consortiums, sometimes they call them, and they come together and they do um, these sort of Uh, basically, I was going to punt the ball over to Michael to talk about
Hmm.
the neuroscience, what's happening in neuroscience right now with IIT and the global neuronal workspace. Can I go ahead and
Oh,
punt to you
yeah. I would love to
Is
hear
as
that
an
that.
the,
example?
is that the punt
Yeah,
right there?
that's my punt right there. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
The-
Um, well, as Louis was suggesting, we all know that crucial experiments are rare or non-existent, so that's too high of a bar. But exactly as you're suggesting, right? So when you say to neuroscientists, tell me what would empirically count as some degree of confirmation or disconfirmation for, the brain literally, running algorithms or a particular notion of representation,
Hmm.
there's no answer forthcoming. And if there ought to be one forthcoming, if they really, want to say this is, deeply explanatory. Um, so, to Louis's point, I think we know the Templeton Foundation recently tried to do the sort of thing you're talking about. It was IIT versus global workspace model. Um, and those two models, while neither one is causal mechanical, they're both arguably, not IIT, but the global workspace model could certainly be computational, I would think. IIT is information theoretic in a way that is maybe not computational. But the point is, they made different predictions about where, the neural activity would be given certain cognitive or perceptual processes. And long story short, neither one panned out very well. So they were, in some sense, I want to say, although the purveyors of these theories might disagree, disconfirmed in terms of their predictions about the neural correlate, right? So for the global workspace model here, right? For
Hmm.
IIT back here,
Hmm.
I won't get into I could unpack it all, but I won't. I think most of us know this stuff, but that's not what they found allegedly. So, but look, here's a problem that you were alluding to, Madhur. These theories can just change their story about the neural implementation, right?
Hmm.
Because they're not like strictly speaking neuromechanisms. So they
Hmm.
can be like, all right, I had the right idea, but I
Hmm.
just got the wrong part of the brain or whatever.
Hmm.
So, you know, this is one reason why it's hard to play this game, right? Like
Yeah.
we do want empirical verification, but we know how ridiculously complex the brain is. And this is sort of what derailed, Searle,
Yeah.
biological naturalism,
Hmm.
right? It's like, oh, well, we'll just find the correlate. And then
Hmm.
from there, we'll find the minimally necessary condition for whatever conscious state. And then
Hmm.
from there, we'll just find the mechanism. But we all know that went south fast. Not that it isn't a good thing to do, but it
Hmm.
certainly didn't go as quickly as they anticipated because of the signal to noise, multi-scale, what
Hmm.
counts as merely an enabling condition
Hmm.
versus like I mean what are you going to do? You're going to like lesion every part of a brain until find the little piece that's still you know what I'm saying? Like this is
Hmm.
just very hard science to do.
So on
Yeah.
that note, yeah, go ahead, Louis. Sorry.
So, so Michael described this case that I think is one that's maybe one of the closer
Hmm.
public ones that demonstrates what Maduro is talking about. Um, But as Michael pointed out, what ended up happening is there was no real evidence for either, and whatever evidence was counting against one, those people would, redescribe or redefine sometimes, and maybe that can be justified
Hmm.
sometimes. But I know, my philosopher hat on, and my historian, philosophy as well. I think some of this work is not just about getting two groups together to pit their theories against each other. I think there needs to be a lot of conceptual work done
Hmm.
to get agreement on what we're talking about. The sort of, the saying, shut up and calculate. And that shut up and calculate attitude is sometimes caricatured as saying like, well, look at how successful physics has been without having, clearly worked out the theoretical or conceptual foundations of quantum mechanics. And look, it's the most empirically supported theory in history, and the calculations always work to
Yeah.
astonishing degrees, and we don't understand, what's
Hmm.
going on there at any deep level. So let's just build up from there, and maybe we'll do neuroscience that way. And
Yeah.
and so one, I don't know that the shut up and calculate is really the right mantra to have to do good science. And
Hmm.
two, I don't know that that would work with the kinds of phenomena that I think many neuroscientists and cognitive scientists study. I think we have to get some conceptual agreement and
Right.
historically kind of, understand where the terms come from. I mean, yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think that kind of shut up and calculate is maybe what we should do, or maybe what neuroscientists are doing, or I
Uh,
don't know, is it a bad
uh,
analogy or metaphor?
I personally see, a dilemma to find a resolution to your question, and this is what I wanted to ask you and Michael both. So the dilemma is this: I personally don't talk politics in science. I think taxpayers on every political affiliation, uh, you know, their money is used to do science, and I think scientists should stay apolitical and just focus on the truth. That has been my stance always. The problem is that we have a lot of people, and I won't, talk politics, especially in the YouTube space. There is actually with people who now rant against scientists on, or they try to dwindle public support for science by saying that, most science is pseudoscience, or most, scientists are pseudoscientists and things like that. There are YouTube channels, like there's a German lady, she has a channel, like a couple of other YouTubers. They kind of discredit science, that how science is going bad, science is fraud, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe that. I think we live in the best era of science in terms of how much science we are all able to do, how much money is available to do science, what technologies we have, and scientists work day and night, and that's when you recognize when you have somebody in your home have a disease. For instance, my father was diagnosed with a fourth stage cancer, sorry, with a tumor in his head. And that's when I was just taken aback with the advancements in neuroscience, in terms of how the brain, the tumor was diagnosed, how it was treated, the whole therapy after that. So hats off to the modern neuroscience, for all of that. But at the same time, I want to target, or, because I'm passionate about it, I can't stand pseudoscience in neuroscience. And there's a rising pseudoscience in neuroscience. Unfortunately, not by outsiders, but within neuroscience community, by scientists themselves, especially late stage scientists, older scientists, a lot of them. Now, the dilemma is that how do I talk about that safely as pseudoscience? How can I call it pseudoscience and write about it and talk about it without becoming, one of those outsiders who want to dwindle the scientific, or public support for science? Because we can tolerate some amount of pseudoscience, okay, till the time funding is there and science is actually progressing. But if cleaning that pseudoscience is an impediment to actually sustain the science or public support for science, then we are shooting on our own foot. Like then the whole scientific enterprise is in jeopardy. So how do we safely address these, which are basically extensions of what you are saying, but at the sociological scale?
I'll I'll come back around to what Louis was saying, but to your point, some people would say that us just having this discussion is lending aid and comfort, to the forces of, anti-science. And um, I want to be, and we're all on the same page here. We all love science. We're pro-science, so we want good science. We're not, we're
Yeah.
not on that page at all. We want to defend science and rationalism and the Enlightenment and all that
Hmm.
good stuff. Um, I understand why people feel that way, but I think we're actually helping push back against anti-science because if science would do the kinds of things we're talking about, the more that it does, the
Yeah.
more there would be any real critique there involved. And
Hmm.
we can't do anything about whatever political or religious or whatever motive some of these people have who don't care anything about science. They just want to, press their ideological point. We're in no position to win that anyway. So I think it's reasonable to worry about scientism sometimes, but I'm much more worried about anti-science stuff. So I think we're doing the right thing by science because what is the spirit of science, as we've been saying, is that you're always, in principle, open to changing your mind or changing your theory in light of what comes, and that you should always be trying to seek that out and not protect, in some conservative fashion, your view.
Hmm.
So, to Louis' point, I think, no, I don't want to. I mean, he knows what I'm going to say because he just heard me give this talk. But we know there are people like Chiri Muta, the abstract brain, and so on,
Yeah.
who defend some version of. I don't know if she would like it called instrumentalism or shut up and calculate, but abstractionism or whatever. Um, because it raises this question, if we have I think she would agree with a lot of the critiques that we're discussing. What would she says, so just let science be like that, just go with these abstractions, these instrumental things for whatever gain. And then she throws it to philosophy of mind. I don't understand exactly how that works or what that's supposed to be. Maybe that's supposed to be the real idea factory or something. But I don't want that, right? I want realistic science with real understanding. I don't want just, predictive devices or intervention or manipulation. And as Louis pointed out, right, like, in quantum mechanics, I'm a philosopher of physics. I'm going to mouth off about this.
Hmm.
Um, we have no idea, quote unquote, which interpretation or physical model is right. But at least in that case, we have this absurdly, you know, incredible predictive model that has led to all new kinds of technology and insights and so on. But we don't have that in neuroscience or
Right. Mm.
cog science more generally.
Yeah.
And and maybe we never can because of the complexity and all that. But if we're ever going to even get just the good instrument, let alone to deeper truths about how it works, I think we have to shoot for, realism, not just be happy with, things like computationalism because we think they're, useful. And then I think you have to have this discussion about what to do going forward, right? Like, what should CogSci look like? You know, what should we be pursuing in
Hmm.
addition to the things that all of us are casting doubt on?
Yeah, I want to I want to echo Michael's point, which is, or one of them, which is that I don't view myself as anti-science at all. I think the critiques of science are pro-science, right? This is we keep coming back to the demarcation problem, and we're always like, we're not going to go there, but we always kind of dip our toe in it. I'm going to dip my
Hmm.
toe again, right? One of the differences between science and say certain or most religious systems is the difference between the roles of dogma and faith and openness and counterexamples, right? And so part of the strengths of certain spiritual traditions is the acceptance
Hmm.
of the teachings, come what may, right? That's part of the strength and having faith in that, right? And that's an interesting feature of human existence, right? Science is not like that, though. At least it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be dogmatic and it shouldn't work on faith, right? In principle, um, you should be able to run your analyses, right? I might run some t-tests or ANOVAs through Excel, but in principle, I kind of know how it works. And I should be able to go and do it by hand. And I can look it up and I can justify it. And that's how it should apply to even the most complex experiment that's happening in the brain. In principle, anyone, right, who can ambulate and read and think should be able to learn this stuff and do it and come to their own conclusions based on reason and revise it and do something different and say why it's wrong, and that's doing its best, right? It's more like boxing, right?
Yeah.
Where you want to spar, right? You want to get stronger. You want to find your weaknesses, right? If your belly is weak, you're going to be doing more work out there, right? And so in science, it's kind of like how it should be. And so there is a worry. I think what I'm picking up, from Mador and Michael's comments, right? There is a worry that, oh, well, Dr. So and so at this university has, called into question the foundations of neuroscience. See, we were right. We should have never given them money. Pump the brakes. I don't think that's what any one of us here is saying. I
Hmm.
think what we're saying is we should step back. We should be thoughtful about our practices, right? Even when we're imbued in a certain discipline, we should be able to call it into question if we want to be good scientists, let alone good philosophers, maybe good citizens. I don't know. I think of an educated citizenry as one that constantly questions, right, and doesn't accept it. So I think being good scientists is just being a good citizen, and maybe vice versa. I'm not sure about that. That's my soapbox kind of thing.
Hmm.
I just don't want anyone pulling quotes from me. I don't want to find it on TikTok or something of me saying something bad about science, and then they're like,
So,
Steve Favela is
Exactly.
anti-science, and I'm just like, oh
Precisely
shit, no, I'm
the
not.
point. Yeah.
Steve, don't worry because my podcast has, less subscribers than any TikTokers. Okay. And the people don't make TikToks of science, so we're still not there as society.
We'll get there, Mador. We'll get there together.
Hopefully.
You know,
Yeah.
I appreciate the humor spirit in that. But when you were saying, there's no science on TikTok, there might not be science on TikTok, but there's a lot of medical advice on TikTok,
There is,
and there's
yes.
been, studies
Mm.
suggesting that 85 to 90% of what is conveyed medical knowledge, quote unquote, via TikTok is just false.
Oh
Um,
my God.
and I
Okay.
wonder what that percentage is for anyone who's attempting to do anything sciency on social media. What are they conveying that might be false? And that's kind of scary.
Uh,
I was recently reading that there's an
yeah.
uptick in folk physics. So
Yeah.
more people are being interested in doing physics in their backyard and figuring out, and they're calling into question things like the laws of thermodynamics because water boiled differently in their backyard or something like that. And then they're posting those videos on TikTok and things like that. I find that kind of concerning.
Michael, any thoughts?
Just, just citizen science. What's wrong with that? Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Maybe we'll do citizen brain surgery too.
don't try that at home, kids. Yeah, I mean, like, we've kind of gotten into very meta territory here, but
Hmm.
think about like Sabine Hossenfelder, right?
That's
So
exactly what I was pointing at.
I assume that's what you were alluding to. And
Yeah.
she's got a few followers, right? Like what, 500,000 or something
I'm
at this
not
point?
several million at this point, and I personally find her unbearable. But yeah, go ahead.
I think, yeah, I think some of it, again, as a philosopher of physics,
Hmm.
she does some pretty intelligent takedowns of things sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, but I would bet a large sum of money that when she's doing the more wiggy stuff or popular stuff or science, or anti-science, that's a different thing, right?
Hmm.
It's one thing to say, here's this interpretation of quantum and here's why
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
problematic.
Yeah.
It's another thing to like go after science as an enterprise. I bet
Exactly.
a large sum of money she's got way more views on those videos.
Oh, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
every view would be making her several tens of thousands of dollars at this point. So,
Exactly.
especially if you rant anti-science, anti-scientists, I mean, somehow scientists who are it takes how much effort to become a scientist. You do your undergraduate, then your master's, then your PhD, then your postdoc, and then few lucky ones, and or when all the stars align to begin some astrology, you become a scientist, right? And your pay is as good as a bachelor's, going into finance. Okay, and then you work 100 hours a week or 110 hours a week, perhaps. Uh, most of us, and then suddenly you become the enemy of the public. It's pretty ironic that how scientists are portrayed as some special beings when they just get by, just pay off the bills.
Maduro, I want to read you
Yeah.
a tweet from a number of years ago that I saved on my phone. And I just read this to, I was teaching a class on science and values, and I
Uh-huh.
read this to them. So here it goes. Study 3 years for degree. Study three more for PhD. Join lab, start working. Spend years studying a problem. Form hypothesis, gather evidence. Test hypothesis, form conclusions. Report findings. Clear peer review. Findings published. Reported in press. Guy on internet. That's bullshit. We go through all this training and then you get, some troll, who might have like a million followers is like, nah, that's bullshit. And so it's
Yeah.
just, yeah,
Well, actually, Kuhn probably would agree with that guy, but maybe not for the right reasons.
How
yeah,
how
yeah.
how?
I'm making a joke that science is often not that algorithmically
Oh,
ordered.
I see. Okay, I took it literally. I mean, my suggestion to all the people who are anti-science is, why do you go to hospital when you are ill? I mean, just ask your neighbor. I mean, if you have something in the brain, just ask your neighbor to pluck your parietal cortex. Why do you need a brain surgeon? I mean, why?
I might dare say that that argument might not be working very much with people. When I see that people are treating certain things with, oh, I don't know, bleach, drinking things like that. Like, I get your point. I'm just a little more skeptical about the current state of things. That people, they might go to
I
their neighbor to pluck their cerebellum or something like that.
Don't dare
I
them.
I mean, see, here's the thing. And this is the reason I want to be careful because people like Sabine are hurting science so much in the name of criticism, that it is becoming increasingly difficult within the scientific community itself to clean science because as soon as you bring that broom, and what broom is in science is another publication where you write something about, to discredit a theory, or to show the flaws. That's how the broom works in science. As soon as you bring out a broom, you risk becoming a Sabine, that you want to carry on and do concrete empirical work, but at the same time you want to do a little housekeeping if you're passionate about your house. You don't feel like good when it is getting dirty, because people who produce shit, they can produce a lot of shit in the time you produce some real small gem.
Yeah, I agree. And some of those people that you're gesturing at, they've got a lot of money to do that.
Well,
Exactly.
I also think that, the pressure to continually crank out content, right? So like if you have that many followers, if you're producing that many podcasts, if you've got that wide of a net to cast, across all of science, we've seen it happen to other podcasters, right? Who are in the same position to some degree or another.
Hmm.
At some point, you're going to start bringing on occultists and, whatever, right? Like you're just trying to like get the numbers up. You're driven by the numbers. You're trying to fill that space like a 24-hour news cycle,
Hmm.
right? I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying I think that's part of the explainer.
But why do you think? I mean, so what has happened is, so for instance, look at top tier journals. Like, let's talk Nature Neuroscience, right? Nature Neuroscience has been not shy at publishing a lot of free energy principle. Like, I mean, you read those articles. Yeah, I mean, anyone can say that this absurdity, what that journal has published lately, it has nothing to do with neuroscience. It's just an abstraction of some far-reaching consequences. Well, why do you think that has happened over time? Because now we are not at a stage where we can even count at a journal that journal has filtered stuff and what we are reading is actually proper science. One has to be really, really good with science to understand for themselves. We have come at a stage that there's no vetting process which is reliable. Why do you think that has happened? Like, and what would be the next vetting? Because it's very hard to be a good scientist and to, see good things among all the bullshit. And it's very hard to train students to do that because now to train students, one of the biggest skill you want them to learn is to, you know, look at real stuff, remove all the bullshit around. It's kind of a new skill to survive. Why do you think that has happened, especially in science?
Well, I want to ask one question. So I don't think I've ever submitted to
Mhm.
Nature Neuroscience or Nature Neuroscience reviews or anything like that. Is it double blind or single blind?
It is not double blind. Also, all the top tier journals, the people who desk reject your articles are not scientists most of the time. Apparently, you won't believe that, by the way, Louis. I lately discovered that the editors at these journals, the salaries are much, much higher than any professor.
Well,
That's a
they,
shocker.
they make good money at those journals. But so thanks for answering the question about the blind. I mean, one thing to do is to minimally double blind
Do
the
you think it
review.
works? Do you think it works? If there's an article, a submission on free energy principle, which cites another 35 articles on free energy principle out of 50 references, do you think the double blind will work?
I mean, not as well, but it's better than single blind, and I think triple blind can help as
Mhm.
well. So some philosophy journals have gone towards
So,
triple
so,
blinding because they have been so concerned with prestige bias, authority bias, kind of things like that,
so what's triple blind?
where the editor doesn't know who the authors are either.
Oh.
Um,
I, I
yeah.
I think we could do a comedy bit around this pretty quickly.
Mhm.
Uh, where does it go? The slippery slope of this, right? So Maduro, was your comment primarily aimed at the review process or the educating the
No,
student process or educating the public process?
no, like, so do you think that has what? So is it that we are discussing now because we feel it now, or do you think science was always like this, and this tension has always been part of the scientific enterprise, or there's something changed eventually that now we have more of this? It is becoming much harder to figure out what exactly good is, what bad in terms of science.
But figure out for the expert or for the public, the non-expert, or what do
For anyone, I mean, even for an expert, like for instance, I have so since I've written some articles on free energy principle, kind of uh, not in the tone of proper science. They are very targeted towards the stupidity of the whole idea. I keep getting these emails from across institutions from Columbia, NYU, Cambridge, Oxford, of professors, commenting on that, and they agree with that, but they cannot come in public. Okay, because they are afraid. In fact, I had a podcast session I had to remove because people were afraid that they'll lose their job discussing about free energy principle. And by the way, my institution has received emails to get me fired because I wrote those articles already from the free energy principle community. So I'm on their target right now. Uh, so so there are PhD students now, a lot of graduate students who think free energy principle is something like a godly theory, and these kids don't know much because once they see them psychophancy that everyone is about, look, Carl, there's a lot of psychophancy in that particular community. For instance, an amazing amount of psychophancy, never seen anywhere else. So these kids actually think that there's something about the theory and something about those people. And these kids don't know better because they have just come to PhD, to start first or second year. It takes time to learn and figure out. So it's becoming increasingly difficult for new incoming scientist to figure out that there's a lot of nonsense happening and this is not real science. And that is basically drifting these nice new talent towards these universal frameworks rather than doing empirical, falsifiable work, uh, which is a disservice to science. So why do you think that has happened over time?
I think it's, I mean, I think there's always been some of that in science, right?
Hmm.
But I think the social media and socioeconomic thing just takes it to the 10th power. Um, so like, I'm no expert on the review crisis,
Hmm.
but we all know what I'm alluding to. And even there, as somebody who, I'm this crazy person who does a lot of different things, which is I'm too eclectic for my own good. It's not a good career move, but I get stuff to review, physics stuff, foundations of physics stuff, neuroscience stuff, or whatever. Um, and I talk to other reviewers, and a lot of it is like, there's just no way that I could understand it.
Hmm.
Like it's deeply, it's some formalism. I've never, there's just not enough reviewers and not enough people willing to spend time to do a good job reviewing. We all know it's a time suck and it's
Hmm.
often annoying, especially if we're trying to help somebody with a paper that really needs work. And then they send you all this stuff. A lot of it you couldn't possibly know unless you were an expert in that particular area. So there's just so much, and it's so much, it's so ghettoized, right? I think that's a problem. But I think um, what you're talking about is a problem for humanity at large, right? This is like an epistemological crisis for all of my students. Like, if you were growing up parented by the internet, right? And you just throw children out there and say, all right, go find truth, good luck. And you don't, as you suggested, Madura, if you don't have that special skill set, if you don't already have some background knowledge, if you
Hmm.
don't know how to navigate, which it's an amazing thing, the internet, if you know how to navigate it, but the signal to noise ratio is pretty bad. So,
Yes.
what's true, what's false, which picture is real? I mean, this is just a problem, I think, for everyone at this point.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I I agree with much of what was said. If I can give a little bit of a plug here for the humanities,
Hmm.
um, I think the humanities has traditionally been where students go, at least during their general education part. So even if they're going to focus on science, they used to get general education in the humanities, literature, perspective thinking, values, history, just learning how to think differently. And I'm trying not to use the word critical, but learning to think critically, right? Like not
Hmm.
just taking things at face value and being able to question them,
Hmm.
but also learning like not to just become a troll. And questioning things just for the sake of questioning things. I mean, that's been an issue since,
Hmm.
times of Socrates. We talked about these people, these trolls. Um, it's not about that. It's also not about going into hopeless despair either, right? Like, what can I
Hmm.
know? There is no ground under me. But learning how to just kind of get along in life in a way that uncertainty is like okay. Seeing different perspectives is okay, and I see that as being a crucial part of what makes a healthy citizenry
Hmm.
is having that kind of education. Do people who never take humanities courses learn that throughout their career if it's focused on science, engineering, or medicine? I would like to
Hmm.
hope so. But I think a straightaway way to do that is to just have them take humanities class
Hmm.
and just kind of learn how to think narratively, how to think different
Hmm.
kinds of possibilities and things like that. So that's my plug for the humanities. No matter how sciencey you are and how pro science you are,
Hmm.
I still think getting that humanities background is crucial. And without that kind of broadly, because I'm putting scare quotes, that broadly humanities education, without that, I just don't think you can have a healthy citizenry. And along with
Hmm.
my theme earlier, without a healthy citizenry, then you don't have a healthy scientific population as well. I
Right.
don't know, too soapboxy, probably. Sorry.
No, I completely agree. I teach a science and values course as well. But to your specific example, Mador, about the free energy principle
Hmm.
and why, so many young people believe the hype is because they equate truth and value with, fame and numbers.
Hmm.
That's That's obviously that stuff doesn't necessarily track truth or justification, and that's the problem.
That's true. And also they don't understand because they're new to the system, they don't understand how the sociology and economics of science works. So they because and it happened to me also because when I entered, I had this fascination of science and scientists being, some very Puritan, people. But that's not the case, right? It's just another system of a different enterprise. So they don't understand the incentive structure at that point to be able to feel that it could be distorted, the possibility of distortion. Yeah.
So
So yeah,
what do we so what do we do? So you've got, someone who's, 17, 18, they're finishing high school, they're thinking about going to college,
yeah,
they're thinking about what to study, they're thinking pre-med or neuroscience, and they're kind of reading online, TikTok, whatever, blah, blah, blah. They're learning about free energy principle or whatever, maybe potentially other, more unsavory theories or things like that. Um, why shouldn't they pay attention to the popularity and numbers? You only have so much time in the day, right? And why not look at who has the highest whatever metric, right? Like that's a place to start, right? What I mean, so how do we address that issue? Um,
Take down the internet.
yeah.
take down the internet?
I'm kidding, NSA.
I like your humor, Michael. It's good.
Yeah.
I'm personally finding that. So when I wrote these articles, against FEP, and not against FEP, actually, they just mock FEP. Uh, and I chose a very polemic and very the humor route because I realized that scientific arguments are not making any sense because the other, the opponent is scientifically dumb as well as scientifically, blind and whatever. Because the debate is not the whole thing is pseudoscience nonsense. You cannot debate scientifically. So, and the other thing was like the way these structures work is now all the incentive is about citation. So somebody produces bullshit. If you call it bullshit, the bullshit is cited. And if you praise the bullshit is cited. So bullshit is anyway becoming stronger and stronger, more. So I don't want bullshit to become stronger in the process of, calling it bullshit. So I wrote these articles in a very mocking tone to reveal the absurdity of the whole concept. And I explained different things, For instance, I even explained, uh, I think, orgasm based on free energy principle in one of those articles. And I have several pieces written which I have not, published because of, social reasons of with the fear of getting cancelled out by the FEP community. Because right now they are trying to get me fired, whatever they can, to do something more. But to show the absurdity. And what I'm finding is that it was very effective because the same graduate students who are not getting the scientific arguments, now when I show the absurdity, they now feel it. I'm finding that humor can actually solve some things in life if used, sparingly. Louis, to your answer, to your question, and then I think we need to do something about the computation. We need to ask questions which reveal the absurdity rather than which questions the validity of those assumptions.
Madhur, have you heard of Brandolini's law,
No, what is it?
also known as the bullshit asymmetry principle?
Amazing. No.
So it goes, the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it.
Oh my God. And here we have bullshit being produced already in like such a huge order.
Yeah. So, not just, you know, bullshit, but even arguments,
Yeah.
papers, studies
Mhm.
done in good faith, when they're really wrong and bad, they often get cited a lot because they're so wrong and bad. And
Mhm.
so it's this kind of like, self-fulfilling kind of, system. If you can somehow just get out there, even if you're wrong, you will
Mhm.
likely, get attention. And then it
Mhm.
will take a lot of effort to refute or to push back against those kind of findings. So I thought you'd be tickled by that
Mhm.
Randolini's law.
It's,
Um,
it's it's fascinating. You made my day.
yeah.
So Michael, I have a question for you. So I see how you think, and I think you very much talk about constraints. Coming back to to neuroscience. You talk about the dynamics and constraints at at different scales, and the topology of constraints. Uh, isn't that a very obvious explanation, or isn't that that a very obvious route to understand the role of brain in behavior and in general the whole enterprise of cognitive neuroscience?
Yeah, I think so. So, when I was saying like, all right, we don't want to reify all these techniques, even dynamics. I'm much more sympathetic to the idea that the dynamical system point of view. But as even Randy Beer points out, you don't want to reify that. Like, we can use differential equations to model all kinds of things. That by itself is not magical, and
Hmm.
that's what math is made for, right? I mean, we can talk about the topological structure of the internet or the brain or whatever. I mean, that's the trick of math.
Yeah.
So but I don't want to just stop at abstractionism or shut up and calculate, as Louis put it. So for me, the nature of reality in general, and the book, Emergence in Context, that I wrote with Robert Bishop, is
Hmm.
about this. This is, I don't know,
Yeah.
speaking of shameless plug,
Hmm.
uh, is about this. And to make a long story short, I think the nature, starting at physics on up, most things are, certainly from an explanatory view, and I would say ontological, multi-scale processes, and things at different spatiotemporal scales constrain one another in all kinds of ways, not just causally,
Hmm.
or but there are adynamical constraints as well, right? There are acausal constraints. There's millions of kinds of causation. I'm certainly a pluralist about this constraint notion. I think this is obviously true for cognition, certainly human cognition. I think a lot of our capacities are, to use a cheesy phrase that I don't have a better replacement for, biopsychosocial. A lot of what the brain is doing, what it does, what it can do, is a function of, social and cultural context, embodiment, and so on. And so, from my point of view, I want to see cognitive science. And, Chirimuta acknowledges this too. She says something like, I think the 4E approach, which I would say is kind of inherently multi-scale, right?
Hmm.
Complex, focusing on complexity science, certainly as Louis practices it. She said, I think they have it right. I think they best capture reality. It's that kind of multi-scale complexity. But she says, I just don't think we can do that science. It's too hard. And what I want to say is, it is really hard, but let's roll up our sleeves and figure out how to get more clever at finding constraints, correlations,
Hmm.
laws, whatever, over different time scales. Um, you know, just, like I'm trying to think of a good example. I mean, imagine if we really did have that magical brain wand or whatever, and we
Hmm.
could in real time see what everything was doing from microtubules to neural synchrony or whatever. I'm just keeping it to the brain for the moment, right?
Hmm.
Um, you know, we don't, obviously that's a fantasy. We don't have that. But we want to try to approximate that capacity for getting data and, for deepening explanation. And I would say that that's going to lead to more predictive power as well. But
Yeah.
going beyond the brain, we all know about stuff like, brains being synced up when they, bodies and brains interact in a certain way.
Hmm.
So social neuroscience is a start, right? We all know now from epigenomics that which genes are on and off, what proteins they're related to, is a function of this messy multi-scale RNA networks, protein networks, DNA networks, stuff going on in the cell, in the body, even culturally. So we're starting to think like this, people like Olaf Sporns and others. But I just think we need to, how do we get good at this?
Hmm. It's hard, as she said, and you will also agree. So 4E is nice, but I have talked to people who mock 4E in ways, and rightly so, because they argue that 4E has not lived up to its hype because we have more philosophical text on 4E than actually empirical investigations. Or at least, if there are empirical investigations, we have not laid down the proper links where people can relate the 4E approach to the empirical investigations which actually align the 4E with the 4E framework.
I think I should let Louis start with this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so um, there's a number of issues here. So one is, are people doing 4E work explicitly? Are they testing hypotheses explicitly about embodied cognition or explicitly about extended cognition?
Mhm.
And I think in the scientific literature, my sense of it is that there's maybe some hand waving to embodiment or extension in the introduction and maybe in the conclusion, and then they try and draw connections between, their particular favorite kind of experiment and how this might be embodied or this and that. Um, and, and and I think why people do that is because it's really hard to do multi-scale investigations, right? Multimodal recordings, which I think Madhur is probably
Mhm.
by far more expert than I am, but there's a movement I've seen in doing more multimodal recordings. So the technology is getting better. We can record from, movements and EEG or FNIRS in movement or eye tracking in movement. It's getting better. But I have to agree that I'm not seeing it done so much in the service of the 4E
Yeah, because
commitment.
it's I think there are five factors for that. First of all, it is tough. Second, you need a lot of funding for that, and apparently funding is not in the 4E right now, so the funding structure is not very friendly. And the third thing is that even if you collect the data, the biggest challenge is the analytics. Uh, and I think that's where a lot of work needs to be done to create these analytical, instruments to deal with such multimodal data to make sense of it, which
Mhm.
needs both algorithmic invention as well as analytical pipelines. And it's a lot of work for single person to do. It has to be, kind of community work. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. But I think an appeal to, and this might sound
Hmm.
too much like FEP or IET, but I think an appeal to sort of what I like to say principles of organization,
Hmm.
right? What are some common principles in nature that we see? Fractals, for example, scale invariant seems to be a very common
Hmm.
feature of in nature. And so, this could be a part of the sort of pipeline, right? In sort of a theoretical background for interpreting the analytics, right? Because the analytics themselves won't speak for themselves. The data won't speak for itself. It has to be within a certain kind of framework. And I think maybe to get a grip on this massive amount of data is to make these kind of appeals to these principles of organization. Again,
Yeah.
I might say fractals, maybe, the type of Kelso coordination dynamics,
Hmm.
things like that, I think could help. Bridge
I'll
scales.
but I'll give you an example of this and tell me if you are aware of this. So, for instance, there was a recent paper in Neuron by Hangen and Xiu. Is criticality a unified set point of brain function? So, well and good, we started from criticality and there's an acceptance now. Initially, there was a lot of resistance to the idea of brain criticality and, power law dynamics. But if you read this article, it falls back again in the same computational, bucket that now they have, for instance, this article argues that criticality is actually a set point and the whole computational machinery is trying to achieve that set point because criticality allows information processing and number of things. So it went full circle into computation again. So how do we avoid that?
Yeah. So without reading the minds of the authors,
Hmm.
here's my charitable interpretation to support my own views.
Hmm.
So if you're going into an area of people that have very different kinds of commitments to the concepts, to the methods, to the theories, and you want to get them
Hmm.
to embrace something that lands on the outside of those things that they commonly accept, some sort of bridge, some sort of connection
Hmm.
needs to be made. I'm using need loosely. It needs to be made, right? So what is criticality for your standard computational neuroscientist? Tell it to me in terms of computations. Try and tell it to me in that way. And I
Hmm.
think that could be a way of maybe getting a broader audience. I worry, though, that you might be undermining the true power of the new idea or new concept when you water it down or you put it in different trappings that aren't quite
Hmm.
right.
Yeah.
Um, So it's more of a rhetorical thing. That's my charitable interpretation is that there's a sort of rhetorical strategy for
Hmm.
making that kind of move. Now, it could also be the case that the authors genuinely think criticality is a kind of information processing and a kind of computation. And that would be totally fine for their interpretation. I don't buy it because of my issues with the
Hmm.
nature of computation, et cetera, et cetera. But I can see why you would
Hmm.
put your
So,
idea in a different kind of costume. It will
so,
maybe something.
so but you would say that being charitable with a new idea is risky because since you know the risk of entrapment, right, by the prevailing status quo, right? So one need not to be very charitable when presenting a radical idea. Is that a better way to go?
Don't be charitable when you're presenting a new theoretical idea.
Yeah.
That would be the better way to go. Um, I don't know. I don't know what better means. If it's to get your idea out there to
Hmm.
more people, then I don't think it would be the better way.
Hmm.
Um, Unless you have someone who's a really huge name in the field, who is a proponent of the view, then
Hmm.
you get an audience already packed in. But
Okay.
unless you're not Carl Friston or Christoph Koch, unless you're not those people, then the rest of us, I think, we're going to have a hard time getting an audience for the ideas that are not mainstream that we're
So,
purporting.
pun intended, can we create some bullshit to become that big first, and then we can actually spread the good ideas?
Want to
You
start
know,
a
Yeah,
call?
Michael.
yeah.
I think I agree with your. I will agree with the phrase that 4E hasn't lived up to the hype.
Mhm.
Um, but nothing has, and part of what worries me is the hype itself. Nobody
Mhm.
should be hyping that much. Um, and that there's going to be you know, a lot of pluralism, a lot of different stuff going on. Yeah, we'll try to integrate it, but again, and I also think we have to be careful about painting for. We glibly use that phrase 4E or how many ever E's there are at this point. But really, there a lot of them are very different. As Louis said, there's different things going on in terms of the science and so on. Um, but I don't want to give up, right? I just want to, I mean, we got more clever about epigenomics. We're just starting to do that. We're getting more clever about interactive or social neuroscience or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of things we have to learn how to do. It's hard, as you guys said, but um, I wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mhm.
And you should never throw babies out, obviously. So,
Of course. I don't know who made this quote, like this what do you call it? Mm, Idiom?
Idiom, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know who made it, what they were thinking, throwing baby with the bathwater. Who does it?
I mean, it's pretty, it got my attention. If anyone's talking about throwing babies, I'm paying attention to what they're saying. So it works in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. So
Yeah.
okay, so enough of the rant. So Louis and Michael both. If I'm a graduate student, I have to start my neuroscience journey, right? How do I not get disenchanted by how do I not get enchanted by all this, all the enterprise and all the hype about the topics and theories and technology, like, like because we have been producing a lot of technicians and scientists lately. So how do we get to like how do we ask questions about like what scale do we ask questions? Uh, and how do we get from those questions to the physiology or to the inner functioning of the central nervous system? Where do we start? Like, what kind of questions do we ask? What should be the constraints on what we ask and how we go investigate in the lab? Or are we in a phase where we should just go random, wild with crazy with ideas, data collection, and we are not yet at a stage where we can actually have a directed way of thinking about the enterprise?
you know,
Um,
I'm going to toss this easy question to Louis.
Hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, so, I've talked I teach in a history, philosophy of science program and in a cognitive science program,
Hmm.
and I get many different kinds of students from different kinds of backgrounds, and I get questions like, how do I even get started? Like, say I believe in 4E cognition, or, say I believe that, I have to study the whole organism environment system to truly understand perception or something like that. Like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to study? Am I supposed to, major, quadruple major in computer science, biology, engineering, and philosophy? Like, what? And, and my advice for them is no, pick one and learn it well, but always be open-minded and always be willing to revise, what your methods are and how you're thinking about the topics. But I don't think there's anything wrong with um, entering the paradigm, right? And being a good worker in the paradigm and getting a job. And, one of my favorite Buddhist quotes is, that the Buddha Shakyamuni is purported with saying, you can't get enlightened on an empty stomach.
Mhm.
And,
That's
and
true.
so if you can't, so you can be Diogenes, homeless on the street with your dogs, and holding strong to your beliefs, come what may. I want a roof over my head and I want to pay my bills, and I'm okay, having, I'll teach stats
Hmm.
and I'll teach central limit theorem and all the stuff, even though I know deep down, like metaphysically, and it's problematic, and and I wish I would be teaching, recurrence or fractal analysis or this or that, but they don't have to. Not all of them have to. But what
Hmm.
we should have to do as students and practitioners is always be open-minded. So that's that first question about, how do we even begin to enter this field? Now, where do the second part of your question, as I understand it, is, well, where do we even start probing? Where's the right scale of investigation?
Hmm.
And I think, if we buy, to Michael's story of multi-scale contextual emergence and multi-scale systems, and it's always multi-scale, it's always contextual. It's going to be, I don't know that we'll ever have a crucial experiment that can find the starting cause. We can always jump in to a system already acting and then try and find how things relate from that perspective. But I think other than being explicit about your background assumptions, the methods you use, your experiment, what you did to the data and the outcome, um, I think this is just the best we can do with whatever scale you're trying to investigate. I didn't want to make a Michael Silberstein argument, but maybe I didn't. So he could correct me. Um,
I think you might have dissed me, Louis. No, I'm kidding. I agree with Louis, especially if, I don't want to say only if, but especially if you take if we take your question, Medora, to be a
Hmm.
pragmatic one about what to tell your students. I think that is absolutely the right pragmatic advice. But I do think, and we pay a lot of lip service to this, and I realize the academy doesn't really support this and it's hard to do. I do think to get at the deep nature of how complex and intertwined this stuff is, we need people, groups of people. No individual can do it all, but we need groups of people who are truly trained across disciplinary boundaries.
Hmm.
Um, so, like one of the interesting things in neuroscience, right, as you guys were alluding to, is so now we use all these tricks from condensed matter theory and quantum field theory, and it's like, oh, we're going to use, renormalization group methods and, dimension reduction and, coarse graining. And that's all great. It's really cool. It's interesting. Um, but one would like to have a community of people who are doing, and then, there's other communities of people who are doing information theoretic measures, right? That's a whole
Hmm.
different thing.
Hmm.
Uh, Obviously, I'm not selling phi or anything like that, but
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with looking at interesting informational constraints.
Hmm.
And then we've got people doing, biomechanism stuff at various scales, people doing neural synchrony stuff. So what I want to see is like build units of people who work together and learn enough of each other's stuff to integrate this sort of thing. Again, I know it's a pipe dream for the most part.
Michael, when you say groups of people trained in these different disciplines, do you mean you need a group of people, each one is trained in all the disciplines, or a group of people where you've got your neuro person, your computer science person, your, et cetera, philosopher? Which one were you saying?
Both. So nobody can be an expert in all these things, right? I'm assuming. Um, until we reach the singularity. But I'm kidding, of course. But you can have teams that are experts, but I think the idea is to have, relatively speaking, polymaths who really do attempt to learn the other stuff, at least to the point where you can integrate all this information and all this sort of knowledge.
Hmm. Do you think that instead of that heavy burden of polymath levels of intelligence,
Yeah, that might have been
that
overstated. Yeah.
that learning a basic, uh, sort of basic, relatively basic, um, way of talking generally about problems, um, effective communication, soft skill communication, like that, maybe that would be more fruitful. So here's one
That's like
scenario.
you trying to involve HR in this. I'm not sure where you're going.
Human resources, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so one scenario is five brilliant people
Right.
who are all trained. They're like Bruce Banner. They all have like, I don't know. Does he have six PhDs? I forget what he said.
Mhm.
But they've all got six PhDs, and then they come together and they solve everything for us. Um, or a group of five people, your neuro person, your philosopher, et cetera, but they all kind of had a basic training in, I don't know, laying out ideas like um, basic logic, like, communication, like taking turns. It's almost like Robert's rules,
Sounds
right?
like the
Like,
enterprise, right? Like you got your communications officer and uh,
yeah,
yeah,
like
I
the
would,
bridge of the enterprise, like Starfleet. Like, so which one
but
are you more saying?
I
Which one
stuck
would
you
be
with
better?
I stuck you with that analogy on purpose because, right? I mean, I'm not going to nerd out about which Star Trek, but in all of these shows, everybody can do, you know, a little bit of everybody else's stuff, right? Like Spock can do physics and, you know what I'm saying? Like, obviously, not everybody can be, a master of all these things, master of none, etc. But at least enough knowledge about what other people are doing that you can understand each other. You can think about how to integrate this sort of stuff, which would hopefully lead to new discoveries and so on. So just I'll give you an example that again, the hype around this is also a problem, but I think you'll be sympathetic with this. The whole complexity science thing, right?
Mhm.
So, um, you know, you've got all this cool dynamical systems theory stuff. You've got the network stuff. You've got people who are thinking across disciplines about modeling different systems using similar formal tricks or whatever. Again, the hype didn't pan out. We didn't get a complexity theory of everything or whatever.
Yeah.
But we did get a lot of insight, I think, that cuts across scales and disciplines.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. But one way I would push back against the example is my reading of some of the complexity science literature is that there are a number of kind of pillars that they subscribe to. One of them is information theory, and a lot of them say information. A lot of them being proponents of complexity science, they take information as fundamental, and then so information theory is kind of its own pillar, but all the other pillars as well are just manipulating or working with information. So dynamical systems is modeling information. Evolution is acting, on information flows and, all this kinds of stuff. And so maybe it didn't catch on for various socio-historical reasons, but maybe they just had a bad foundation, information theory as the foundation. And so that was problematic. If that's true-ish, maybe neuroscience might be viewed in that same way, that, even if it is a bunch of different people coming together, because I mean, what counts as neuroscience,
Mhm.
right? I mean, there's people who just do modeling, there's people who are putting, chemicals in little tubes, people manipulating genes, people looking at, social behavior, as you were saying earlier, Michael. Um, but maybe they all kind of share a bad foundation or a weak
Mhm.
foundation. Um, so maybe there is some work. that needs to be done there to get clear on the conceptual foundations that might not necessarily work itself out in the kind of kumbaya Star Trek bridge story that you have. What do you think about that, Michael?
Yeah, I think it's like I'm not sure if we count. Do you count cybernetics as being having made that mistake? Do you count that as another branch? I'm not sure about that. It's kind of pseudo computational sometimes. Um, and for the record, I want to be very clear. I'm not an information fundamentalist. I'm with you there. Yeah, I mean maybe that's true. I'm not sure that there is any magic. Again, I think the information theory thing went crazy, right? Because now everything is information and it's a new paradigm and it's going to explain everything. I just think that kind of thinking is just wrong-headed, period.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's going to be any magic one explanatory idiom that is the magic bullet. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Whether
Yeah,
it's dynamical systems or information or computation or whatever.
this whole fascination with the universal principle, universal law of the brain and cognition is kind of, uh, I mean, I don't understand, the fascination. Where does it come from? I think it comes from God complex, probably,
Just
right?
just likely, yeah. Hmm.
Hmm.
Well, you got, I think the way that's, we keep going back to the social issues, sociology of science issues, but I mean, the way science works, you kind of have to have a big voice, right? You have to go out there, you have to promote your ideas. And, to some extent, having, a healthy dose of narcissism can facilitate success, right? It's like, well, I'm getting smacked down, I'm getting some articles rejected and this and that, but you know what? Damn it, I know I'm right. And I'm
Hmm.
going to keep, pushing through and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to have talks and I'm just going to be a really big personality and I'm going to get these ideas forward. And yeah, that plays a huge role as well.
Yeah, I mean, scientists are very assertive people. I mean, they think that they're right about something, and that kind of drives them. So there's definitely a selection pressure of these strong personalities, within the enterprise. So
Hmm.
and then you have this tussle between those strong personalities of, the strongest personality, having had huge success with promoting some BS. It's not just about the theory now you are tackling, you're also tackling with that personality, to create room for things. I think pluralism is good, and if the enterprise has enough space, to accommodate new stuff, then I think it's healthy and things can be wrong for a long time. But when you have an overarching theory like the free energy principle, which is more like I call it I'm writing this paper, I want to create a new, tag of theories, the cannibals. So the cannibalistic theories, which cannibalizes every damn thing. So, and that has been free energy principle. The risk of debating scientifically with free energy principle is that, or the proponents is that they will engulf you or reinterpret whatever you have done in the language of free energy principle, and you lose everything because, it's like covering everything with bullshit. So you rather not let good stuff come in contact with bullshit, otherwise it will be like, you know,
Well, we have great, I'm sure
yeah.
somebody's made this analogy many times, but just think about physics and the rush to string theory, right? And all
Hmm.
the resources that went into that and all the epicycles connected to that. And still, it has yielded very little, I would argue. I don't think there are too many people that would fight me on that one now.
Hmm.
And look how many percentage of grad students, money, et cetera. That's exactly the kind of thing we don't want to replicate in cog sci or neuroscience. Um,
Right.
but I would say, I think Louis and I would certainly will agree about this. We're totally with you. We want to take these, you know, quote unquote philosophical foundations and turn it into good real science, and
Hmm.
um, not just create another ism to debate against computationalism or whatever. And it's how to do that, whatever 4E you pick or however multi-scale or whatever, it's really hard. And I think we're just trying to figure it out.
Right. I think that's the biggest challenge. And also, the part of the optimism, because you really, as a scientist, you really want to create something, rather than be a proponent for something which already exists. That's not fun as a scientist by heart. It can give you, the accolades. Uh, so definitely a scope for optimism there, to pick up this challenge. Louis, any thoughts?
Optimism. It's not a word that usually goes next to my name. Some people say,
Hmm.
critical or pessimistic. I'd say I'm a realist.
Hmm.
Um, so I'd say from a realist perspective, I think we can have hope.
Okay.
Um,
I'm a romantic.
you're romantic, yeah.
Angry,
I'll bring you a rose. That's
angry
fine.
romantic. Yeah.
Yeah, we have hopes of how it's going to turn out. Yeah. I was really surprised that, we started with talking about something potentially like really abstract, like the nature of
Mhm.
representations. And we just ended up just being, grounded by,
Uh,
um, the sociology and historical and the policy and all that kind of stuff. I find that really, really interesting.
but I think that's a foundation of representationalism, isn't it? Well, it does not have any empirical foundation. It has sociological foundation.
I think that's a fair take. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I would love to see, and Madura, I know this is the kind of thing you are facilitating. I would love to see calm, critical, conversations like this with the relevant neuroscience people,
Hmm.
um, and have a real, not a debate, not a battle, not a, you
Hmm.
know, a real conversation.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's an interesting and worthwhile thing to do. If we can find people who can do that
Hmm.
without getting their back up or taking it
Yeah.
personally.
I think that's on my list. I have been lately, too occupied with the grants, but uh, that I always wanted to do that. Like have a panel, basically, two or three, and moderate that debate, in a very scientific fashion, because seminars and conferences were supposed to do that purpose. They don't serve that. I don't think there's any platform left for those debates. So I think podcast is the only place where that thing can happen. The good thing is that it's all online, so people are physically safe. Nobody can punch in your face. So an added benefit of doing it remotely, right?
Yeah,
I
I was
have
going to
been,
ask.
yeah.
Michael said, a calm discussion, calm
Hmm.
debate about this. And I'm wondering, can we have both? Can we have one that's calm and professional, and then can we also meet in person
It's
and
like,
maybe,
well, round two, we can have alternate rounds of calmness and
I mean,
feariness.
I'll throw
Yeah.
down. I was just,
yeah,
So, so by the way, just to, put my marketing here, I don't know whether you're aware of the next Society for Ecological Psychology Conference, International Conference on Action and Perception and Action, sorry, ICPA. It's happening in Omaha in 2026. So today morning itself, I went to check the venue, and most likely it would happen in Omaha Zoo, uh, in the aquarium building, where you can walk 15 feet and watch penguins and shellfish and jellyfish and sharks and everything. Okay, that's the plan.
Omaha, Nebraska.
Omaha, Nebraska.
They have
So
penguins in Nebraska.
we have the zoo. We have one of the best zoos in the country, and that
That's really
has
cool.
yeah. So I'm trying to see the finances. If it all works out, we will be having the conference in the zoo, and you will have the full zoo access during the conference time. In fact, I'm planning to have box lunches instead of a buffet for lunch, so that people can take their lunches and roam around the zoo for take breaks and chat. Uh, so I'm trying to make it as interesting as it can be in Omaha, in Nebraska. I want people to have really, people should say that we went to Nebraska and we had the most interesting conference. That's at least my effort. So let's see how it goes.
Well, it's a great venue for affordance hunting.
It is. But affordance and hunting don't go together, right? The zoo is like we are here for affordance hunting. Oh, where is affordance housed
I
or
didn't mean
caged?
hunting animals, just to be clear.
I mean,
Uh,
that's why I was saying, where is affordance caged?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a plan, and I hope you both can attend. It will be really great topic, great
That's
conference.
cool.
I would also love to have some sessions, to push forward the boundaries of 4D cognition, and especially the ecological psychology further. And having you, Michael, with the physics background, and Louis with you as a bridge to neuroscience would be really great. So I'll reach out with
yeah,
invitations, within a few weeks.
Very kind. Thank
sounds
you.
fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I often think of Louis as a bridge.
No,
To
he is,
What
yeah.
kind of bridge? Like like metal, brick, wood? I don't know.
The
If you
bridge
were a
apps.
bridge, what kind of bridge would you be?
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to meditate on after we're done with this. I'm going to meditate on what kind of bridge I am.
Glial. Glial, right?
That's right. It's going to be clear. People,
Yeah.
might feel like they're going to fall down, but they
Hmm.
will be safe. I will hold them.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Louis, and thank you, Michael, for this awesome conversation. And it really turned out to be more interesting and packed than I imagined before. So thank you for that.
And thanks
Thank
for
you.
thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. I appreciate it.
I hope we can have continue our chat and have more sessions in the future. Yeah.
That would be
Sounds
great.
good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Have a great day ahead. Bye.
You too.
You too.